Hi, everybody. Welcome to this outdoor learning webinar series. It's been created for you by a consortium of national outdoor learning organizations, including Big Green, EcoRise, FreshFarm FoodPrints, Outteach, and us, Green Schoolyards America. Throughout this series, we've tried to bring you diverse voices from large and small, urban and rural districts in different climate zones and regions of the country, all with inspiring stories to tell about their thriving outdoor learning programs. And we hope they've informed and inspired you, and we hope today will be no exception. Recordings of the first two sessions are available at the links in the chat if you missed them, and remember to tune in for session 4, Equity in Outdoor Education and Environmental Justice, coming up on May 25th. This is session 3, Creating Outdoor Space, the Infrastructure of Living Schoolyards. And Green Schoolyards America is delighted to be your host today. I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We humbly acknowledge the Indigenous people in memorial who were wrongfully removed from their ancestral lands where we live and work today. I offer deepest respect to the Piscataway and Anacostan tribes, the Indigenous people of the Northern Virginia region where I am based. I invite each of you to think about the land beneath your feet, the ancestors whose journeys brought you to this land, and the ways we are all connected. To learn more about the Indigenous people where you live, visit nativeland.ca. I'm Nancy Striniste, and I'm thrilled to be your host today. I'm the Director of East Coast Programs for Green Schoolyards America, and I'm also a designer and a former teacher, and I've been creating outdoor spaces for children for more than 30 years. Green Schoolyards America collaborates with school districts and public agencies across the U.S. to establish large-scale living schoolyard programs that transform school grounds into ecologically rich park-like green spaces. Our goal is to improve children's health, learning, and happiness while contributing to communities' ecological and climate resilience. We are working to change the norm for school ground design, use, and management so that all children will have access to the natural world in the places that they visit every day. We center equity in our work and partner with communities that have the greatest need for educational, environmental, health, and open space improvements. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kimbal Musk, the founder of Big Green, one of our consortium planning partners, to welcome you today. Kimbal?
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here. I want to thank Green Schoolyards America for being such amazing partners of Big Green to make this happen. I want to thank the Department of Education for helping guide us and prioritize outdoor education opportunities in America. We believe it is critical for, obviously, during our time of COVID. As we speak, my daughter's, she's 9 years old, has her elementary school has a COVID outbreak, and it still continues to shut down classrooms. And it's a very difficult reality that we're facing. That being said, even after, and the Secretary of Education has said this, even after COVID, teaching outdoors is a beautiful and powerful addition to our learning. We've seen in our almost 12 years now of building beautiful outdoor classrooms called learning gardens, the impact of learning outside. You can see test scores go up. You can see kids behaving better the rest of the day. You can, obviously, in our case, because we focus on gardening, they're growing food, and you can see their intake of fruits and vegetables sometimes double, especially in 5th grade. Amazing results. Big Green, we are a nonprofit. We've been operating since 2011, and we believe that growing food changes lives. We believe that growing food improves your nutrition security. This is a very important difference to food security. Nutrition security is actually the quality of food you have access to. It improves your mental health. your ability to cope sometimes with the difficulties we're facing right now about COVID. It exposes you to nature, and it also opens your eyes to the weather volatility created by climate change. Big Green believes that growing food changes lives. Prior to COVID, we were building, as I mentioned, these beautiful outdoor learning gardens. We built in 650 schools across the country. We had a wonderful program where we would do everything from the general construction of the learning garden all the way to training teachers on how to teach in the garden. And unfortunately, COVID came along, depending on how you look at it, because now we're onto interesting new things, and it forced us to really revisit our business model. And the importance of outdoor education was more important than ever. So it was critical that we enabled teachers to teach outside because of the reduced spread of COVID. And in the summer of 2021, when Delta came along and we were told by other school districts that we would have to not work in schools again for a whole nother year, we changed our thinking and said, how can we be helpful? We continue to have support from our donors, but we decided to become a grant-making organization. And I'm sure many of the people on this call today were recipients of a $2,000 grant that was given out without any grant application. We decided to do this, and within a few weeks were able to send out the funds. And we learned a lot. It wasn't a perfect situation, but it was fast. And we were able to get $2,000 grants to almost 500 schools in September of 2021. And at that time, we reached out to Green Schoolyards America, and they were able to move with us, move fast. We did Zoom webinars, and we got hundreds and hundreds of schools support to teach outside. Not only am I grateful for Green Schoolyards America for their support today, but also for their support during those crazy, crazy times and how fast you guys moved. I hope to see, through the engagement of the Department of Education, much more investment of time from teachers, resources, and money into outdoor education. And I can't wait to see what's next with the Department of Education to support even more outdoor education programs. Thank you all, and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you. Thank you, Kimbal. Next, I'd like to begin our official program today by introducing Andrea Falkan. Andrea is the Special Advisor for Infrastructure and Sustainability at the U.S. Department of Education. She also heads the Green Ribbon Schools program. Andrea's full bio is linked in the chat, and welcome, Andrea.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. As Nancy said, I'm the department's special advisor for infrastructure and sustainability. Believe it or not, there was no precedent for an infrastructure and sustainability role at ED prior to 2011. In that year, the department created our U.S. Department of Education Green Ribbon Schools, which is a small unfunded recognition award. For years, we've also heard from a variety of engaged stakeholders nationwide on all sorts of matters related to school sustainability, environment, health, climate, and infrastructure. But we have not generally been authorized specific funding or programs in these areas. Moving to the next slide. There are several reasons, ranging from COVID to climate change, that we're now able to more actively address these topics. On behalf of the U.S. Department of Education, I'm excited to introduce this webinar on outdoor learning infrastructure and to elevate the importance of outdoor learning. We are looking forward to hearing case studies of schools and districts engaged in this work in communities across the country. The examples you will hear from today represent past winners of our U.S. Department of Education Green Ribbon Schools District Sustainability Award. That includes LA Unified in California and Boulder Valley School District in Colorado. I also want to explain how, despite limited statutory authorities around school infrastructure and curriculum, the U.S. Department of Education, or ED as we call it, can still play a role highlighting innovative examples and sharing resources. and how we need your help to do that. I'll touch on both of these federal agency functions in my brief introduction to today's featured speakers. So moving along to the next slide. First, we at ED spotlight best practices through our U.S. Department of Education Green Ribbon Schools Award, or EdGRS, which is now completing its 11th year. This award is the one concrete policy mechanism ED has that's focused on environment, sustainability, and infrastructure. Thus, we are eager to have strong participation in it from all states. This is where your school or district can get involved. Briefly, how this award works. Early learning centers, schools, districts, and post-secondary institutions apply to their state education authorities for their nomination to ED. That's because state education agencies and higher education authorities have an important role to play in school sustainability. Now, states publish their applications. It varies from summer to fall. Usually they have an early winter deadline, and then they submit to us in around February. Your application and deadline will depend on the state you're in. There's no required federal application. It varies from state to state. Normally, we announce honorees every April on Earth Day and host a ceremony in Washington, D.C. in the summer. Honoree representatives receive media attention, a plaque, and attend a variety of events. We use their examples to communicate promising practices and inspire other school communities. So it's a communications and outreach tool, not a certification or benchmarking program, and that's really important to note. Moving on to the next slide, what are they doing, these honorees, to win this award? They have to show progress in three broad areas. These are our three pillars: reducing environmental impacts and costs, improving health and wellness, and teaching effective environmental and sustainability education. It's important to note that nominees must show progress in all three pillars to be selected by their states for nomination to my agency, ED. It's not a menu of options, it's all of the above. Naturally, green schoolyards and outdoor classrooms and school gardens figure prominently in their work and their national accolades. To learn more about Green Ribbon or to apply to your state education agency for its nomination to ED, please visit the Green Ribbon page on our ed.gov. Even though we know this work is increasing across the nation, states, that is state education agencies, have been struggling to find nominees because few schools and districts apply. There are even some states that don't nominate for this award at all. So while state participation is voluntary, if you're doing this work in your school, there's a good chance that if you ask your state education agency to nominate you to ED, they will consider doing so. Moving on to the next slide. I also want to point out that we recognize early learning centers and post-secondary institutions, as well as districts and schools. Sometimes people think it's just a school award. We've seen urban, rural schools, new and old construction. You don't have to be a new LEED certified school to get this award. There are magnet, charter, underserved communities, and non-public schools. We've seen it all over the years and really aim to meet the nominees where they are. There's a lot of variety regionally, and that's just fine. Moving on to the next slide, the second key role for ED in this space is sharing resources from the federal, family, and national nonprofits to schools. Right now, we house this on the Green Stride School Sustainability Resource Hub. There you'll find additional webinars like this one. We also have a newsletter, a social media presence. We've done an annual tour in the past. We're hoping to do more with a school infrastructure and sustainability clearinghouse that is part of our fiscal year 2023 budget request. We've really aligned this request to sustainability, health, and equity aims of the administration. On our next slide, I want to hit on a few of the federal funds now available. One of the few positive results of the pandemic is that it has allowed us to highlight the value of outdoor environmental and sustainability learning and high quality, modern, healthy, and efficient school facilities. As a result of COVID and the administration's focus on infrastructure, federal funds have been made available to support this work. That means that there's now more for us at Ed to share with schools than ever before. Some of the things you'll hear about, and I know my colleague Mary Filardo is going to be talking more about federal funds and in more detail as a upcoming presenter, but I want to point out the administration launched a plan for building better school infrastructure last month. This includes investments from the bipartisan infrastructure law and American Rescue Plan, such as a $500 million grant at the Department of Energy to improve the energy efficiency of school facilities, a $5 billion clean school bus program to support electric school bus acquisition, and funding for lead in water testing and remediation. So some of this has been, some of these pieces have been around in different iterations, but some of them are new, and there's a lot more than there was in the past. We also have at the U.S. Department of Education emergency relief funding related to COVID, including $122 billion to states to help schools stay open. And a lot of that funding has been used to improve school building systems in a way that reduces energy costs, supports healthy indoor environments, as well as by providing engaging outdoor classroom spaces. So Ed encourages the use of those recovery funds to support healthy, efficient, safe 21st century learning environments, both indoors and out. On the next slide. So we use at Ed all of these examples and resources to encourage an all of the above approach to green schoolyards. That includes composting, habitats, learning gardens, restoration work, schoolyard animals, as well as sustainable schools in the sense of energy, waste, water, transportation, environmental health, whole child health, and environmental and sustainability learning. These green schoolyards that we're going to hear about today offer engaging hands-on outdoor learning opportunities that promote health and achievement while also improving local communities. I was asked to address where we would like to be on the Green Schools Continuum. I haven't met a single Green Ribbon honoree, even the more stellar ones, that doesn't have plans of future garden bed expansion, a new greenhouse, a restoration project, or even higher sustainability aims. They're always striving to do more, and I think you'll hear that from LA and Boulder in a few minutes. Personally, I'd like to see this school sustainability work become ubiquitous so that anywhere we send our kids, and I have 2 little boys, they will reap the academic and health benefits of green schoolyards. I'd like the federal recognition award that I developed for the department and run to become completely unnecessary. Some of this may come with additional national, state, and local leadership, interest, funding, and supports. To be sure, the way our education system is structured, it would be impossible for us to wave a wand at the federal level and make it all happen. We have a very decentralized education system. Federal funding, as you may know, is only 8% of education funds in this country, and it's even a much smaller portion of school infrastructure funds, as I'm sure Mary will touch on. Moving to the next slide, I'd like you to know that with the support of my Biden administration colleagues, we at Ed are reviewing every available tool to prioritize equitable access to healthy, safe, sustainable, resilient 21st century learning environments and sustainability learning that equips students to face the challenges of the future. For this reason, I'm especially thrilled that Ed has proposed a small Office of Infrastructure and Sustainability, which would house a national clearinghouse on school infrastructure and sustainability as part of our fiscal year 2023 budget request, with the aim of supporting schools in creating safe, healthy, sustainable 21st century learning environments. And that was just announced last month. There are a couple other functions for that office. It would essentially formalize a lot of the work that I've been doing over the last 12 years, but with more support and put it on paper so this actually exists in our federal agency. Moving to the next slide. If you're attending this webinar, you probably already know that outdoor learning was a vital educational tool well before the pandemic. Access to nature is, as Kimbal said, fundamental to intellectual and social development, as well as increasing physical activity, nutrition, and hands-on learning. Outdoor learning is possible at all grade levels in urban, rural, and suburban locations, and moving outdoors is feasible in all climates across the US. I know because we've recognized nature preschools in Wisconsin and Minnesota that get preschoolers out snowshoeing and sledding and animal track observing even in winter conditions. So I invite you to use the resources from this webinar series, and on our Green Strides Sustainability Resource Hub, I've seen schools with ostensibly limited resources overcome long odds to create fantastic green schoolyards. I have faith that you can as well. And my last slide, I want to thank you for joining today for this, the third in a 4-part webinar series on outdoor learning. We at ED look forward to hearing from these past Green Ribbon District Sustainability awardee representatives, and to recognizing more schools and districts for their outdoor learning and infrastructure efforts. With that, I'll pass it back to Nancy.
Thank you so much, Andrea. That was really, really helpful. I appreciate that. And now I would like to welcome our next speaker, Sharon Danks, who is the founder and CEO of Green Schoolyards America. Sharon is the author of Asphalt to Ecosystems, Design Ideas for Schoolyard Transformation, and we are thrilled to learn from her work today. Her full bio is in the chat. Welcome, Sharon.
Thanks so much. And my role today is to tell you a little bit about, to frame green schoolyards and the infrastructure it takes to put them together, and to explain a little bit about why they matter and why we work on this topic. Next, please. The state of school grounds across the US is really very varied, and you might live in a place that's in the suburbs that's nice and green, and should know that there are all kinds of schoolyards out there, and the majority of them, unfortunately, don't have enough plants and trees. We have nearly 50 million K-12 students across the country attending school on the public land that is part of our public school system, and so many of them, particularly in our cities, look a lot like this. And they don't have resources outside to offer that improve the well-being of students, their communities, or the environment. And we are working to try to change that. So next. We see a lot of schools that look like this. And we are hoping that you'll join us in an effort to create and implement systemic investments that will shift the palette that you see here into a much more rich, ecologically a vibrant place that will encourage learning and public health and community access to nature and climate and ecological resilience. Next. Because when we do that with our schools, we can get a lot of rich benefits out of it. And what we have right now are outdated school grounds, for the most part, that were designed to match with our 1940s education goals and practices, and curriculum today has shifted. We include a lot of hands-on learning and place-based learning, and that requires places to do those things outside. Next. It's also, as we see it, a human right to have access to nature. And in the US, we recognize that in our prison system. We, in many places, are guaranteed 2 hours of outdoor time to prisoners, and yet children don't often receive that much time outdoors. And so it's not only the quality of the environment that needs to shift, but the time that we allot children and youth to be outside. Next. So equity is at the center of our work and at the center of this problem. I think many of our cities don't have equitably distributed public green space. And so if we are able to green all of our school grounds, since schools are in the center of most neighborhoods, we'll be able to connect most children with the natural world every day, and their communities can use those spaces often after hours. Next. And while one school alone might be small, together the land that they all manage is really significant and has a substantial impact on the ecology of the neighborhood and of the cities. And so choices that school district facilities managers make about how they manage their land is really important, and has to the environmental footprint and to the children who are there every day and to the community. Next. So what are living schoolyards or green schoolyards? We use the term interchangeably. They are, in our words, richly layered park-like environments that strengthen local ecosystems and climate resilience, while also providing place-based hands-on learning resources for children and youth of all ages. Next. They're places that, as others have said, are perfect for teaching across the curriculum, to have engaging hands-on instructional resources when you need them right outside the classroom. They support learning across all grade levels and across all curriculum areas. They give you a real world context that helps children improve their understanding and enjoyment of what they're learning, and also helps enhances ecological literacy and climate literacy. Having a green schoolyard is something that improves physical activity levels of children, and that's both it happens when we give them good infrastructure choices to be more physically active in, and also when we set our rules for school grounds that allow children to use their bodies fully. Next. Green schoolyards are also wonderful for mental health, excuse me, and social emotional well-being. They give kids a chance to have contact with nature, which has been shown to reduce stress by itself, and also they often have places for relaxation and encourage collaborative activities like the sandbox here. Those children are all collaborating together on a project they created. It gives children and youth places to learn the social skills that lead to autonomy and self-confidence and having healthy relationships. And fundamentally, we think that part of the central definition of what a living schoolyard is it's the place that is designed to put children and youth first. It's a place that is designed to increase joy and happiness and laughter. Some place that will give you a sense of place and well-being and positive associations with school. Next. And also fundamentally, it's about ecological resilience, about developing school grounds that are child-friendly green infrastructure, so that we can improve the ecology of the site while also still allowing children access to that space. And that green infrastructure, like trees and plants, can strengthen wildlife corridors and infiltrate stormwater and cool urban heat islands and improve air quality. So we can really do a lot when we add plants back to school grounds. And so I've got a couple of frameworks and things to think about. That this is just a really fast overview of the topic, but next, as you think about how you might make green infrastructure at a school or a district, consider that the land that schools are on is an overlooked asset. This is a place, we have about 2 million acres total across the country in our school systems. And that is a lot of land that could be put toward ecological restoration. And at that scale, if we do things systematically across a whole school district's land, that can shift the ecology of the place. And it's also essential to put children at the center of that ecological design so that we're not adding things to the grounds that then reduce children's space. We want to make sure that we have nature and children both able to use the site. Next. So when you begin, you think about what is the vision and purpose of what you're doing. It could be about stormwater or climate or health or air quality or habitat or community engagement and learning and play. All of those things. The more of them we can do at once, the better. Next. Consider the time frame that you're planning for. Are you working on something that is temporary, a pandemic response, where you might need 20 outdoor classrooms, for example, in a brief amount of time, or a longer permanent space that has maybe fewer spaces that have more of an investment in tree growth, for example, long enough time scale to allow trees to grow. Next. And then think about the scale of the impact of what you're doing. A lot of schools start, at least, with a demonstration scale project. Oops, coming back. Demonstration scale project here. These 3 solar examples show the different scales. Like this pond is run with a really small panel. That's a great educational explanation of solar power. And then that one panel standing next to the pond provides energy of 1 classroom. On the same school's rooftop, we have enough solar panels to run 1/3 of the school's energy. So that offsets the environmental impact of 1 school. So that's a school level impact. And then the school district is also working to have all schools be grid neutral. And so this is another school in the same district in California that has 100% of its energy needs met with net zero with the solar panels on the rooftop. So that's a district scale impact, looking at how they use all their sites together to reduce electricity needed. Next. And so So then looking really briefly at wildlife habitat, if you think about all the places there are to plant on a school site, whether it is in front of the school or in parking lots or in the back where the kids are, if you coordinate the planting of those areas, particularly areas that are not high use, and make them wildlife habitat plants, you can do a lot to really improve wildlife corridors, to improve the foraging ability, the habitats for all different types of wildlife, but specifically aiming at birds and butterflies brings a lot of creatures to school grounds that children can see and enjoy and cause very little trouble for the grounds as well. But it's easy to do and fun. Stormwater management can have small or large interventions. Here's an example of a small one. That's a demonstration model, rainwater harvesting in small barrels for seasonal garden irrigation, conservation demonstration, and it's a great teaching tool, but it doesn't really have a very large impact beyond a few garden beds unless your school gets a lot of rain year round and the barrels fill regularly. Next. You can have a much larger stormwater management impact and by reducing the pavement on school grounds, and that can happen at a single school or over an entire district. In the city of Berlin, Germany, 20 years ago, they unpaved 400 schoolyards and required them all to infiltrate 100% of the biggest storm in 10 years. So that quantity of unpaving has shifted the whole watershed health of all the neighborhoods. So it has been done, and it's been done 20 or 30 years ago. So we can catch up and try this too. And it really, this is an example in the photograph of stormwater infrastructure that's very effective and yet designed as a beautiful park for children. So children don't lose access to their space, and we still get full ecological benefit and also habitat benefit and climate benefit. Next. And then, so just coming to the climate crisis, which is truly a crisis, especially in our schools. And I think what's at stake is our children's ability to go outside at all in the next 20 years at school. Because what we have are acres and acres, thousands of acres of this. And that means that millions of children across the country don't have any shade. And actually, I think millions of children just in California alone don't have any shade. And so this is a crisis for children of health and well-being. And we need to act now to address this and respond to the climate crisis and protect children who are uniquely vulnerable because of smaller body size from extreme heat. Next. The trees that we see on a lot of school grounds right now are, when the schools have trees, are often planted in the places the adults like them. They're at the curb for curb appeal. They're in the teacher's parking lot. They are not where the children are. Look at your school. This is the most common pattern we've seen. And this is an urban school where it's maybe the worst. Next slide. And then this is a suburban school in a high income area. You can see the pools in the backyard. It's hot in this area, and yet this school has no shade for the children. So we need to put the trees where the kids are. Next. And the materials we pick in our school grounds matter. Some choices of material make our school grounds hotter than they need to be. So if we have unshaded asphalt, plastic grass, rubber surfaces, those all increase the temperature on your schoolyard. So if you're in a hot climate, don't use these materials unless you can shade them. Next. And what we can do to fix this is take out the pavement and add trees. Trees are ecological buffers. They can provide places that cool the temperature, cool the microclimate for children, reduce the sun exposure and urban heat island effects, and also cool the buildings in adjacent areas. We can also involve students in analyzing this problem and in fixing it, and they can take measurements of their temperatures and can help adults figure out where the tree should go. And this is an empowering way to help them address the climate crisis. Next. Some problems are too big for us to fix if your school is on the edge of the water, as this one is. And the water is encroaching here. We just need to probably, unfortunately, move some schools, I hate to say. Some problems are too big for us to solve with green infrastructure. Next. So models exist. We can learn from others. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are paths to follow. We have some on our website about how you get started as a district. You can do this too. Next. And so just in closing, there are some planning and policy things to think about. Include green schoolyards in your facilities master plans, adds school land to the city and regional plans, optimize the environment at school for children and ecology at the same time, include kids in the design process. Next. Plant trees where the kids are, remove as much asphalt as you can, make some topography and plan for children's happiness. And overall, think about grounds and public land devoted to children as a precious resource in short supply and use it wisely. Ensure that green infrastructure on school grounds directly benefit kids and responds to their needs while meeting these ecological goals. Next. And invest in this now, because living schoolyards and environmental and climate literacy will bring investment in the future health and well-being of children, and communities, and the planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. That was amazing. Our next speaker is Karina Salazar from the Venice Community of Schools. She's the schools administrator in the Los Angeles Unified School District. Her full bio is at a link in the chat, and welcome, Karina.
So welcome everyone, thank you for being here. As the former principal of Kingsley Elementary, we learned about the benefits of outdoor learning from our firsthand experience incorporating outdoor classrooms into our instructional day. Next. We were the pilot project for the National COVID-19 Outdoor Learning Initiative in 2021. This collaboration was instrumental in our reopening plans at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. As we planned for the eventual return for students and teachers to come back to campus, our focal goal was to establish outdoor classrooms as an intentional strategy for a safer return. Additionally, we're really concerned about restoring students' connection to learning. It was clear that just listening to all of the stories of what was happening in our school community, our families, our students were experiencing a significant level of trauma. Because of the pandemic, they were experiencing loss of loved ones, a sense of isolation, being away from school, which is a safe space for many of our students in urban settings. And so not being able to see their friends, the interrupted school routine. So these were real issues that were impacting our youngest children. And thus it was through this student-centered restorative lens that became the compelling factor in creating these welcoming environments outdoors to reestablish students' sense of belonging to our school community. Next. And so we embarked on this incredible journey with our partner from Northern California, Green Schoolyards, and locally with Claire Latané, Assistant Professor of Landscape Architecture from Cal Poly Pomona. And so we started off by planning, designing, and we eventually built 4 outdoor learning classrooms from the ground up that were incorporated as part of our reopening plans. So here's our kindergarten morning site classroom, and some of the purposeful features include our alignment with the philosophy of Reggio Emilia. So you see natural seating, the use of tree stumps, areas that provide students choice in terms of what type of learner they want to be, these flexible spaces that can be adapted and responsive to the lesson. Of course, we also have a whiteboard out there for the teacher, seating for the teacher, and then towards the left side of the photo, you'll see these planter boxes, raised planter boxes that we use to define the perimeter of where the outdoor classroom starts in this kindergarten playground. Next slide. This next class is the succulent clove that we designed for our middle to upper grades. And the features of it include spaces for both small and whole group instruction, flexible seating, and then really important to this particular space was a shade sail as a protective layer from the sun on hot weather days. And then different types of planters to again define that perimeter of the space. Towards the back, you'll see that we installed woolly pockets, and that would eventually became a vertical garden wall that was also serving as an additional function of being a sound barrier for working and learning outdoors. Here's a picture of day 2 of our reopening, and teachers are delivering content instruction. And you see that right away, we noticed that teachers were gravitating towards these spaces for multidisciplinary purposes. So the teacher on the right is actually delivering a writing lesson. The teacher on the left was using the same exact space for math instruction. Next. So an essential component to all of this work was to really supporting our teachers in their practice to feel successful as they transitioned from the four walls to these outdoor learning spaces. And so we partnered with UCLA Center X, they were our university partner, to provide professional development, teacher coaching, and demonstration lessons. And so those were just some of the important supportive systems to help teachers shift their practice to the outdoors. Next. The last two classrooms are here on the screen, the Woodsey Sage and then the one further towards the back. And so one of the worries that was on the minds of teachers as they were preparing for these impactful shifts in their practice was whether they'd be able to keep students' attention, right, while they were working outdoors. And so a takeaway that we discovered was that teachers noted that students' attention span was elevated, students actually needed less redirection, and there was a presence of high engagement. So that really just validated the work, and it really supported that culture of teachers wanting to be in these spaces. And as students worked in these spaces, we noticed when the teachers would transition back to the classroom for other instruction, because we were sharing these spaces across our school, we noticed that students were beginning to ask, oh, can we have tomorrow's lesson in that classroom? And so that was really phenomenal to see. Next. So some of the lessons that we learned was that the ability to create these outdoor learning spaces immediately transformed the way our teachers were teaching and the way students were learning. We saw the elevated attention span, less need for redirection, but a really added benefit is that we feel that part of the reason why our students were so engaged was because this really created that multi-sensory learning space. And it was really restorative, something important that students needed to be because they had been indoors during the pandemic for such a long time. We also noticed that there was an increased level of science being taught. And we know that that is really important because, we're growing students that have stewardship, and we want them to be cognizant of environmental literacy. And then, of course, the instruction, by just having these environments, it really allowed for teachers to think about ways to continue supporting that student-centered lens and inquiry-based learning practices. So now in my current role as the Venice Community of Schools Administrator, here's an aerial photo of one of the schools in my coast structure. You can see from the photo that the proportion of green space to asphalt is minimal. The tree canopy outside of classrooms in LUSC is at about a 4.5%. So we know that with the large presence of asphalt, that contributes to the heat island effect that Ms. Danks was sharing just earlier. Next. So thinking about global warming and the impact that this has on especially our summer temperatures, where temperatures rise higher, in LAUSD, with the large prevalence of asphalt on our campuses, that creates, it traps the heat in the pavement and the concrete. And so that's, creating those conditions for heat island effects. So we're continuing to explore avenues to transform our schools. In LAUSD, there's a lot of initiatives that are leveraging ways to support environmental literacy. And so we wanted to just share with you that in LAUSD, we have one of the historic longstanding outdoor education programs. And to show an example of how that work continues to be expanded, in 2009, there were about 2,500 students participating in those outdoor education programs. By 2018, over 42,000 students were participating in outdoor education here in LAUSD. Recently, LUSD has also passed two key initiatives, the Environmental Literacy Resolution and the Climate Change Resolution. Next. So adding on to our long history with environmental literacy, this is a picture of 1923. These are LA Unified students from Los Angeles High School that began a reforestation project in what is now known as Clear Creek Outdoor Education Center in LAUSD. It is one of the oldest outdoor education centers in the country. In this slide, we see our students today enjoying the fruit of that labor. And the saplings that you saw in the previous slide are these same trees. They're now mature and they're being enjoyed by thousands of students that visit Clear Creek each year. So the attributes of having these learning experiences have been chronicled across many research studies. We know that nature has various outcomes that support learning. We know that it leads to increased higher achievement, enhanced intention. Next. We also see outcomes in terms of the enthusiasm and the engagement and the improved behavior. So all wonderful assets to cultivate in our learning spaces. And so when we think about what this provides, another connection that we made is the role of being able to use notebooking strategies. We know that these science notebooks support literacy, numeracy, and climate science instruction. And so in closing, in LA Unified, we're making a strong commitment with supporting climate literacy in the classroom, on the playgrounds, and through field study programs. And so thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Karina. That was incredible. The work that you guys are doing is just amazing. Okay, next I would like to introduce Ghita Carroll. She's the Sustainability Coordinator for Boulder Valley School District. Her full bio is linked in the chat. Welcome, Ghita.
Thank you so much for having me. I am from the Boulder Valley School District. We're located in Colorado. We have 56 schools, about 4.1 million square feet of operation, and we're actually in 9 municipalities, not just the city of Boulder, and three counties. We have about 27,000 students, and we recently finished a $576.5 million bond that was passed in 2014. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of reasons why the district has prioritized in the past and continues to prioritize sustainability. As an educational institute, we strongly believe that this is the right thing to do. We want to model best practices and behaviors in our schools for our students. It's also our responsibility to educate our students how to be good citizens and stewards of the world, which includes living sustainably on the planet. We also live in a community that not only prioritizes and supports this work, but expects it. The district continues to be recognized as a leader in the field. We were very recently awarded the Best in Class team approach for support strategic investments in efficient and healthy schools by the Efficient and Healthy Schools campaign. And we're very proud that our district was one of the first to be recognized by the U.S. Department of Education as a Green Ribbon awardee in 2014. We know that there's an economic benefit of running our operations as efficiently as possible. And finally, as a district, we continue to prioritize healthy students, healthy buildings, and a healthy community. And there's enormous overlap between those goals and the sustainability work that include but aren't limited to our focus on indoor air quality, sustainable modes of transportation, healthy foods, and then of course, access to outdoors. Next slide, please. So we have a long-standing commitment towards sustainability in both our daily operations and within our curriculum. In 2009, we created our first sustainability management plan. And we recently launched the newest iteration of the plan and progress report celebrating more than 10 years of the work and highlighting our progress, which include, just for one example, 13% reduction in greenhouse gases over the past 5 years since the last plan. All of our plans are supported by Board of Education policy. Next slide, please. The bond program that I mentioned earlier that was generously approved by voters in 2014, next slide please, wrapped up during the pandemic and provided much needed capital improvements to our district buildings and included significant funding directed at creating innovative learning environments. Sustainability was integrated from the beginning of the bond planning process, and sustainability targets and priorities were incorporating into our documents, articulated to all of the project teams and tracked throughout the bond. Some of the highlights you can see here on the slide, but I want to specifically highlight that we were able to create new or enhanced outdoor learning spaces as part of this work. Next slide. When the pandemic hit in March 2020, our district put together a 5-phase plan in the hopes of being able to move easily from one phase to the next based on new health data. So phase 1 being all remote, phase 5 back to normal. The goals of this plan were to ensure health, well-being, and safety of all students and staff, maximize student academic growth and achievement, provide supports to teachers and staff, and assure operational and financial viability. Next slide, please. We started right away to integrate how learning outdoors could help our district meet these priorities and get kids back to school safely, learning in person. So one of the first things we did was to create a document outlining all of our existing designated outdoor learning spaces. And we were excited to confirm that most of our schools did have at least one space created specifically for this purpose, thanks in large part to the bond work, but also partners with partnerships such as garden organizations over many, many years. So on the document, we noted things like seating and shading and other features and how many people could fit with social distancing restrictions in mind. And the next step was to identify other locations on the sites that could be modified to be outdoor learning spaces. So for example, green spaces with existing shading from the building or trees, and spaces with seating or where seating could easily be added that were near to the school. As summer went on, we began to solidify our work with partners also interested in helping to support the work. So this included members from our local cities and parks and rec departments, environmental educators, and many more, parents, teachers. And with this group, we were also able to identify nearby park locations and features that schools and teachers could potentially use during this time to get together in person. We also regularly attended the webinars hosted by Green Schoolyards America, which were helpful beyond measure. All right, next slide, please. So throughout the last year and into this year, we've had more and more schools continuing to reach out for assistance and support. Masks were required indoors through early 2020, really just as of a couple months ago, and are still worn by many. So the outdoors continue to offer a nice break for masking, as well as additional learning opportunities. And the schools have kind of gone above and beyond in how they've used the outdoors now. So teacher conferences have been held outside, school dances and activities, community gatherings, and we've seen so many ways that these spaces have been used. We also have super champions, such as the assistant principal pictured here, who continue to look for ways to support their teachers and provide insight to what the sticking points are and where additional supports could help make access to outdoor learning easier. So for example, we know that access to restrooms and having extra staffing support to help when kids do need to get inside quickly are both critically important. Next slide, please. We did receive grant funds from one of our local environmental partners to enhance outdoor learning at 3 of our schools. For equipment and professional development support for teachers. So seating and shading continue to be our most requested items. Other helpful items are voice amplification systems, wagons, whiteboards, storage, and more. The Green Schoolyards America, again, has a matrix of materials and costs that was extremely helpful for this purpose that we were able to tweak and use for each of these schools. Next slide. Many of our schools with gardens have used those, continue to be a wonderful resource for outdoor learning. So in the picture in the middle here, you see a group of students learning about winterization of plants from one of our garden partners. Our local group that I mentioned continues to meet every other month. Some of the wonderful things that have come out of that group have been a collective of online resources available for lessons, professional development support for teachers, in-person and virtual, weekly how-tos and tips for teaching outdoors. The City of Boulder and Growing Up Boulder led a year-long initiative at one of our schools focused specifically on outdoor learning. And we had a group of master's students from the University of Colorado work with 8 of our schools to design an ideal green schoolyard space, and it had phases for implementation, pricing, architectural drawings, which we've already turned over to our planning and assessment department, and we're working to move forward to figure out our future needs. Next slide, please. So speaking of the future, as I mentioned, we just released our new Green BBSD action plan, which sets our goals for the next 5 years. This work was done in partnership with the Green Schools National Network and many staff and community members during the pandemic is when we created this plan. It covers 4 strategic areas outlined in the slide: curriculum instruction, climate and culture, leadership, and operations. And in each of these priority areas has an overarching goal and 3 to 5 supporting goals. Next slide, please. So in the climate and culture section of the plan, the overarching goal is that all faculty, staff, students, and families will have regular opportunities to experience sustainability in action. Next slide, please. And I'm thrilled to report that the first supporting goal in this section is to create green schoolyards and outdoor learning spaces at all of our elementary schools and increase outdoor learning spaces by adding seating and shading at all of our secondary schools. So this is the first time that green schoolyards have been pulled out so specifically in our sustainability planning documents, which is, we consider one of the silver linings of the pandemic. Outdoor learning and green schoolyards are also mentioned in the other sections of the plan. So next slide, please. We have detailed year-to-year actions for each of the supporting goals in the plan. They're included in the appendix, which is all of this information is on our website. This is a living document, but we are very excited to deepen our practice, gather more robust data, and understand more fully the impact on faculty, staff, and students as we continue this journey to transforming into a healthy, equitable, and sustainable school district, where all of our faculty, staff, and students are engaged and prepared to lead us into a sustainable future. So my last slide has our website where you can find our sustainability plans. A lot of the tools that we put together for our schools are on our website, including surveys that we sent out, and you are welcome to reach out to me with any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ghita. That was amazing. You guys are role models. I'm going to take just a few minutes to tell you as quickly as I can, because I know we're a little behind time, about what we call the National Outdoor Learning Library. Is a collection of resources on our website. The National COVID-19 Outdoor Learning Initiative was launched in June of 2020 and brought together hundreds of experts in health, design, education, school gardens, planning, even sound engineers and entomologists who all volunteered their time to create the core of these materials designed to support schools and districts in moving learning outside during the pandemic. This free library continues to grow and expand to support all aspects of outdoor learning now and into the future. It's organized into 9 chapters, all written by experts in each area. Chapter 1 includes the history of the COVID-19 Outdoor Learning Initiative, the partners who came together, and the extensive press coverage that this work and outdoor learning in general received during the pandemic. Chapter 2, Living Schoolyards and Climate Resilience, is a new chapter that focuses on Green Schoolyards' core mission, as Sharon explained it. Chapter 3 reviews the many health benefits of outdoor learning along with guidelines for healthy practices outdoors. Chapter 4 includes tools and resources for teaching outside, outdoor curriculum, activity ideas and strategies, plus pandemic tools. Chapter 5 focuses on school gardens, their benefits, and how-to tips. Chapter 6 looks at nature play, recess, and non-academic use of the schoolyard. The design and infrastructure chapter includes an augmented reality tool for envisioning outdoor learning on your campus before it's even there, along with campus assessment tools, budgets, guidelines for choosing furnishings, to make the schoolyard inviting and comfortable to students and teachers, and tips for weather, noise, insects, allergies, and more. Chapter 8 describes policy initiatives from across the country and funding for outdoor learning, featuring work by our next speaker. And the last chapter contains inspiring on-the-ground examples from all 50 states, linked to an interactive map with press, social media, and case studies on states, districts, and individual schools that provides evidence of the effectiveness of the concepts supported throughout the library and in this webinar. And next, I would like to introduce Mary Filardo, our last speaker. Mary is just doing incredible work, and she's going to close with some nuts and bolts information on federal funding. Mary is the founder of 21st Century Schools, and BASIC, the Rebuild America's School Infrastructure Coalition. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Nancy, and everyone. And I'm going to shorten mine because there's such rich information, but I wanted to say that the money doesn't come without a plan. And so just really encourage you to do your assessments, envision what you want within your community on your yards, write a plan. It can't be a verbal plan if you're going to get any real dollars. And then in the development of that is when the money comes. And go to the next slide, Nancy, please. I don't know why it says Environmental Literacy Fund and LAUSD, but really what this is I'm not going to focus on that. I'm focusing on federal funding. There are often, private sources of funds. There might be state funds. But what we are in right now is an opportunity where there are some federal funds from the ESSER and even from the state and local fiscal recovery funds. You can use those for school infrastructure and including for outdoor learning. So the next slide. So the opportunity is that there's money available now that has never, ever been available to districts for outdoor learning infrastructure. And that's the furniture, that's the digging up the asphalt, that's the disposal of the materials that are being done, because you can't just dump them, right? They have to be paid to be dumped. But the funds will expire. They're not going to be there until you come up with a way to use them or figure out how to use them. But they are complicated to use. But again, it's worth it. They're substantial dollars, but it's real work to get access to the federal funds for these purposes. Next slide. So in terms of the deadlines, they vary. The first CARES money had to have been obligated already. The second tranche of money, which nationally was about 54 billion, has got to be obligated by the fall of this year. The final, what is the biggest amount of money, about 120 billion, as Andrea mentioned earlier, doesn't have to be obligated until essentially 2024. And there was a call that was on at the same time as this, so I wasn't able to listen in on it, but I had folks send me notes. And there's a liquidation period after the 2024 date, which can be up to probably 18 months. So if you obligate the dollars by 2024, you have a period of time to spend them after that. So they wouldn't have to all be spent by September 30th, 2024. Next slide. Part of what makes this complicated, any kind of a project that you're not going to be able to do yourself within the district with your employees requires you to use your local and state procurement protocols. If you're using federal dollars, there are prevailing wage requirements in federal funds. Now, in many states, they have those anyway, so it's not necessarily a problem. But in some of the right to work states, they have to use it. But frankly, Arkansas, Florida, Texas, when the money was there from the Great Recession, they used those federal dollars. Arkansas used over 400 million for school construction. So it's not that those states don't know how to use the prevailing wage requirements. The reporting and audit requirements for the department, they're a little muddy. Their forms have changed a number of times, but frankly, good practices, good documentation will protect you in the end, but it's going to require some real reporting. If you mix your local state with your federal funds, the federal rules apply. So you have to think about, maybe you just do contracts to buy, outdoor furnishings, or and the labor that's used to kind of do other work might be done under a different contract. There are about 12 states that don't have any facility offices. So if there's going to be state review, it can be difficult, but again, it's going to be worth it. Obviously on top of what are internal bureaucratic issues, there are also the contractor and labor shortages and supply chain challenges. So it's real work to get this done. But again, as you can see from the incredible examples, it's really worth it. Next slide. Already we know that other school districts are using the federal funding from ESSER for outdoor classrooms. Here, it was a survey of about 4,000 school districts, and over 10% of them were using it for outdoor classrooms, shade, fitness equipment, as well as other facilities improvements. Go ahead. This is just, I think probably the best, if you go onto our website, you'll see part of what I want you to do is understand the scale of what's out there and why I'm saying it's worth the effort. We're looking at essentially 176 billion for just ESSER 2 and 3. And, of course, normally there's no federal dollars for school facilities. This is obviously has to do a lot of other things, but even if 10 or 20% were going towards school infrastructure, you'd be looking at 20 to 30 billion dollars on that. And to give an idea, even all of the federal dollars that come in fiscal 19, it was that went from the federal U.S. Department of Education to school districts, it was about $57 billion. So you can see when you're talking about almost $200 billion, this is a huge increase of federal dollars into state and local districts. Go ahead, next. So the other really enormous pot of money is $350 billion that has gone to states and municipalities. And this is important, particularly around outdoor learning, because your parks and other agencies are eligible to get this, but the schools actually are also. And on the bottom of the slide, you can see the U.S. Treasury just put an FAQ out, and they say, well, can you use it to support public school facility improvements? And they said, yes, there are numerous ways you can do this. Obviously, you have to get the dollars from the state or from your municipality, but again, this is going to be worth the trouble. And in fact, these dollars at this point, although I know that the labor community is concerned, but at this point, Davis-Bacon doesn't apply to these funds. And why would schools be a good candidate for these funds? Well, at the state level, they're the second largest capital outlay for state funding, after highways. So it's a big sector. Next slide. So anyway, I'm going to stop there because I know they want to have some time for questions, and I think it's just really it's going to be worth the trouble. But don't kid yourself, it's going to be a lot of work. Thanks, Nancy.
Well, thank you so much, Mary, and thank you to all of our incredible speakers today. We hope you all enjoyed and got a lot out of this presentation today. Be sure to tune in for webinar 4, Equity and Environmental Justice, which will be on May 25th. The recording of this session in our blog post with resources, speaker bios, and answers to the questions posed during the webinar will be emailed out and also available at the link in the chat. Thank you all for attending today and for the care and concern that you show to America's children every day. Good night.